Let's continue our series looking at the historical reliability of the Old Testament of the Bible. Did the Israelites actually come out of Egypt and conquer Canaan? There's actually quite a bit of evidence for this. Let's start looking at these three cities, Jericho, Ai, and Hazor. Now, these three were the ones that the Bible says were actually burned. There were several others that were conquered, but these three were actually burned according to the Bible. So Jericho is the first fortified city that the Israelites came to and destroyed after they crossed the Jordan River, as described in Joshua chapters 1 through 6. You can still see the location of ancient Jericho today, even on Google Maps. It's been excavated by many archaeologists over the past century. Early archaeologists like John Garstang found evidence corroborating the Bible. But in the 1950s, Kathleen Kenyon said these layers were 150 years too old, dating to 1550 BC, based on not finding a particular pottery type called Cypriot bichromeware. Then in the last 50 years, several other archaeologists like John Bimson and Bryant Wood have corrected the dating and shown that these layers actually did have that pottery or imitation bichromeware that dates them to 1400 BC, the time of Joshua. So what did they find? They found that Jericho in this late Bronze Age layer had two city walls. There was a lower retaining wall, then a mud brick wall on top of that. However, interestingly, they found that around 1400 BC, the mud brick wall had collapsed and fallen outward and down almost all the way around the city, forming a ramp that would have made it easy for an invading army to go straight up into the city without any need for ladders or siege ramps or battering rams. Of course, this is exactly what the Bible said happened. The wall collapsed outward. If Jericho was taken by a siege, you'd expect the wall to be pushed inward, but instead it fell outward. There was one small part of the wall that had remained without falling outward, which may be where Rahab's house was. Next, they found a very thick burn layer, up to 3 feet thick, of ashes, showing that the city had been completely burned at that time, which fits Joshua 6:24. Very interestingly, they found a lot of storage jars full of grain, which had been burned with the city. This perfectly matches two facts that the Bible mentioned. One is that they conquered Jericho right after the spring harvest, when the Jordan River was in the flood stage around the time of Passover. Second thing is that there was no long siege of Jericho. They had just had their grain harvest, and the city inhabitants thought they had plenty of food stored up for a siege, but then God collapsed their wall, and they all died, and their city was burned. And the Israelites were commanded not to take any plunder, but just burn everything, and that's what happened. The Israelites just left all the food in the city and burned it all, and which is very unusual for an invading army at that time, which would normally first take out all the valuable things like the grain and such out of the city and then burn it. Finally, the archaeologists found that there was a long time of no inhabitation of Jericho after it was destroyed, which again perfectly matches what the Bible says, about 550 years according to 1 Kings 16:34. So Jericho is one of the clearest archaeological confirmations of the Old Testament, and even the miraculous aspect, because the wall collapsed all around the city. I recommend these videos for you to learn more about it, this one from Joel Kramer and this one from Doug Petrovich. There's two other cities that the Bible says were burned by the Israelites in Joshua's conquest, Ai and Hazor. Interestingly, both of these cities have been excavated by archaeologists, and both of them show a burn layer from that time period. And the other 20 cities listed in Joshua as conquered from that time period do not show the burn layer. So it's a perfect match to the Bible. I encourage you to watch these videos to learn more. In Ai, in the place called Kirbet el Makatir, archaeologists have found a city gate and scarabs that date a destruction layer to the time of Joshua, and the layout of the hills and the city placement is exactly how it's described in Joshua, related to the ambush and so on. Joshua 8:28 records that they burned the city, and the archaeologists have found this burn layer. In Hazor, as the quote says here, excavations at Hazor have revealed two destruction layers, one in the 15th century BC and one in the 13th century, end quote. The 15th century fits well with the biblical conquest, as in Joshua 11, and the 13th layer is a second attack, probably mentioned in Judges 4 by Barak and Deborah. Interestingly, the archaeology dig at Lachish actually found a pottery fragment from Joshua's time that had some ancient Proto-Hebrew writing on it, where some soldier had dropped it maybe on his way out of the breach they made in the wall. It seems to say something about the servant in charge of the honey. Check out the links for more details. Next, there's the Amarna letters. These are 382 clay tablets discovered in Tel El Amarna in Egypt. About 340 of them were letters from Canaanite vassal rulers to the Egyptian pharaohs of the 18th dynasty around 1370 to 1340 BC. Pharaoh Amenhotep III and IV There were about 25 city-states that regularly paid tribute to Pharaoh and in return could ask him for help if they got attacked. And the letters showed the city-states were often fighting and jockeying with each other, divided, and it kind of made it easier for the Israelites to walk in at that time. The reason that many of these letters were written is that there was a mysterious group called the Abiru, that's the Akkadian word, or Sagaz in Sumerian letters, mentioned 123 times in the letters. The word Abiru is thought to mean rebels, brigands, outlaws, or vandals. And here's a slide, a picture showing the different kingdoms that were there. You can see that this yellow area, that Canaan, was nominally tributary, a vassal state area to the Egyptians. But Abiru is thought to mean rebels, brigands, outlaws, or vandals. This is a group of nomads or outlaws that was making raids on these cities, causing them lots of problems. So the Canaanite kings were writing to ask Pharaoh to send help, such as troops, to fight off the Abiru. This is the exact same time and place as the Hebrews were recorded in the Bible as conquering the land of Canaan. Probably not all of the Abiru of the Amarna letters were Hebrews, but the invading Israelites were likely called Abiru by the author of the Amarna letters, the authors. There were apparently some other Abiru that were attacking the northern area of Palestine at the same time that Israel was attacking the southern parts. These letters also show that Egypt was apparently weakened at that time, unable to hold on to their Eastern Empire vassal cities, unable to send troops or money for some reason. Of course, this is explained well by the Bible. Egypt, just 40 years previously, had been decimated by the plagues and the loss of their chariot force and lots of their slave force. The Bible records that Israelites were not able to conquer and occupy some cities like Megiddo, Gezer, and Jerusalem, but just defeated their army and killed their kings. The Amarna letters corroborate this because there are letters from Canaanite rulers of Megiddo, Gezer, and Jerusalem. The Amarna letters also corroborate Joshua 11, verse 10, and Judges 4, verse 2, that the king of Hatzor ruled over several of the other cities, because the ruler of Hatzor is the only one that had the title of king. Another fascinating thing is that while most of the Canaanite kings were hostile to the Abiru, the ruler of the city of Shechem, named Labayu, seemed, from the letters, to be strangely friendly with the Abiru, and his son was even accused of collaborating with the Abiru, according to the letters. This also matches the Bible. In Joshua 24, Joshua calls all the tribes to Shechem for a big conference, but there's no record of Joshua ever conquering Shechem like all the other cities. So it seems like it was somehow a peaceful visit to the Canaanite city of Shechem. Of course, from Genesis 12, we remember that Abraham had lived in Shechem some 400 years earlier, and in Genesis 33, Jacob had lived there for many years, and he'd even purchased land there. So perhaps this ancient connection allowed there to be peaceful relations there. So the Amarna letters provide a great archaeological match to the biblical account. Here's a couple more connections. There's a section of Egyptian hieroglyphics, which was a pedestal base, now called the Berlin pedestal, which seems to mention Israel along other nations like Canaan and Ashkelon. The only question is the dating. It seems to have been carved in the 19th century, or in the time of Ramses II, but the spelling is the older 18th dynasty spelling. So either way, it seems like this artifact may have come from Egypt during the time of the Judges, mentioning Israel as a foreign people group alongside Canaan and Ashkelon. Also, up on Mount Ebal, there's an ancient stone altar complex that has been excavated, and the oldest layer seems to date from the time of Joshua, which fits the Bible. Check out Joel Kramer's nice video for info about these things. Also in Shechem, there is a remnant of a temple with a large stone pillar in a courtyard, which, according to the history, may be the actual stone that Joshua set up, as mentioned in Joshua chapter 24, verse 26, and the place where Abimelech started his revolution in Judges 9. Check out Joel Kramer's video and Ashby Camp's article for more information about these things. So in our next video, we will look more at the Judges period and move out of the Conquest period. But all these things so far quite strongly corroborate the Bible.